What is the Second Amendment for? What did the right cling to so much? The line's right to bear arms to defend against a tyrannical government. Now, after the call to war on people of color, Chicago, Memphis, etc., who is to say people aren't just protecting against a tyrannical government, i.e. Tyler Robinson? Careful. I haven't dug into it more. Maybe I should, but I won't, because I'm pretty sure I'm right. If you read the Constitution as originally just being generally a constitution that was, we have a government of enumerated powers, and the Constitution is here to tell us what powers are expressly delegated to the federal government of the United States, and then whatever's not expressly delegated to the United States, and then whatever's not expressly restricted from the states is left to the states, or left to the state governments to decide. Like, I still feel like a very clear reading of the Second Amendment. This has nothing to do with making laws about preventing citizens from owning firearms, and everything to do with the states still being allowed to maintain a well-regulated militia to fight off a corrupt federal government. I think that is entirely the accurate reading of the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That the federal government cannot disarm a state's militia. The federal government cannot go into a state and make it subservient to a federal army or a federal police force. But conservatives will never view... Conservatives love the federal government when it's Republicans, and they hate the federal government when it's Democrats. Check out the DC versus Heller decision. That was the big gun one, right? Maybe someday. So the people here would just refer to local state governments. I think that the goal, remember, the Bill of Rights, I believe, if you think about where the Constitution came from, if you think about what the whole Constitutional Convention was about, right? We had, prior to this, we had the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation, it was a very weak unification of the colonies, held together. It was just very, very, very weak. You had your Federalists, and then you had your Anti-Federalists when it came to designing a strong federal government that would simultaneously be strong enough to, engage in military war, be a representation of all the states, but then weak enough such that the individual states still maintained their autonomy and, had their own respective governments that had the ability to do whatever they wanted to do in their states. The Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments that were added to the Constitution, I believe were, I don't know if I'd call this a concession, but this was like a bargaining chip kind of, I think, used against the Anti-Federalists to basically say, hey, listen, we promise that the federal government's not going to fucking wreck all your shit and, do a bunch of crazy shit to you guys. And part of this, I believe, was like the right for states to still maintain their own militias, so they wouldn't be completely reliant upon the federal government, because obviously if a state has no ability to defend itself, and states were still getting into conflict with Native Americans and everything, I don't think as much with themselves, but the idea that a strong federal government would show up and just take over and conquer all the states, or be able to just bully them and force them to accept things that they wouldn't want. I feel like that's a fair reading of the Second Amendment. I feel like it's more historically accurate than, because every time but I haven't read the Heller case, so maybe if I read that case, maybe I would change my mind on it someday. But do you disagree with Penn's interpretation of the Second Amendment? I don't know if Penn is a constitutional scholar guy. Every time you listen to Second Amendment people talk about how weirdly structured this is, they always have to find a weird way to incorporate this first clause, a well-regulated militia. What does that mean? I feel like that's a really hard clause to explain. I don't know what a well-regulated militia has to do with individuals. Maybe it's both, maybe. But the reality is, well, let's look at this from the perspective of, you are a state and you want to still be able to, fight off natives from the West, or have a military that, can still to some extent represent the rights and freedoms of your people against a tyrannical federal government, right? You ought to have the ability to do that. Well, if we read it from that perspective, and the Bill of Rights is here to protect the rights of the states, not restrict the rights of the states. You're going to make an amendment. You're going to bake into the Constitution and dictate to a state whether or not they're allowed to regulate firearms to their own citizens. Excuse me. That's up to the state to decide, not the federal government to restrict that from the states themselves, right? If you read it from that framing, in my opinion, it super makes sense. Like everything here is like very obvious. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. How could a state be free, be willingly part of a union, be part of a federalized system, if not also to have the ability to defend itself from a corrupt federal government, right? A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Makes sense. The federal government can't tell the states, no more militias for you, no guns, no arms, give it all to us. You will only be protected by a federal government. It reads easier. It makes so much more sense. You don't have to do like a bunch of weird mental gymnastics. It's like, well, when they say militia, they just mean like private citizens could theoretically make their own mini militia. Like, I think that's all bullshit. Why does the federal government have a military then? Well, we have a military for the security of the country, right? For all of us. We kind of need that. That's one of the important things that a federal government does, is the ability to have a military. The language comes from Federalist 29, so you're correct. I think we made it up to that one, didn't we? 29. Considering the amendment, then would it be legal for California to order that the state National Guard has the lawful duty to combat ICE or federal troops, but that's also a full-on insurrection against the United States too? Obviously not legal. Well, maybe. But that would be what it would be for. If the president of the United States were to deploy the military to a state that didn't want the military to be there, that, in my opinion, that's the reason why the Second Amendment exists. The Second Amendment exists so that a state could fight off a tyrannical federal government. Now we're way past the original Constitution, 50 years into the existence of this country. So like the idea of fighting off the federal government of one of 50 states is obviously a lot less likely. But in my opinion, that is a more accurate reading. I shouldn't say more accurate. I think that's a precise reading of the Second Amendment. That's what it was for initially. Understanding contextually, like when it was drafted, why it was drafted. The idea that, I don't know. I'd have to read the Heller case. Heller? Maybe it would convince me otherwise, but. The National Guard isn't considered state militia. Correct. I don't believe the National Guard is. I'm not sure what the maintenance of the state is, but I don't think that would be considered a state militia. I don't think so. The National Guard is more of a federal thing, isn't it? I would need to go back and look at the structure of all of that. Because technically, I don't think the president is supposed to be allowed to call in the National Guard of a state unless the governor allows it. But I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure. I don't know. Destiny, the first 10 amendments are clauses surrounding the principle of individual rights. The militia clause is entirely separate from the clause saying it is the right of the people to keep and bear arms. The first clause is a recognition that the free state, the nation, is only secured by a well-maintained and armed population. I totally disagree with that. Nobody cared about there being a secure nation state. That was the big bad guy. That was the fear. That was the enemy. The newly created federal government was what everybody was afraid of. Oh, we just fucking revolted against a tyrannical king, and now you have the great idea to create one unifying government for all of us again? Wow, you're so smart. With a president and everything? Awesome, great. Fuck you, right? Like that was the whole thing. Oh, it's going to have a military and everything, a whole federal... Isn't this literally what we just rebelled against? Nobody was worried about the federal government being... I just don't think that the fear was that the states, and also I don't even know if you'd be worried about your state, being oppressive against you, because that would be up for your state constitutions to figure out and your state courts to figure out. The fear was that the federal government would be oppressive to the states themselves. I don't think to individual citizens. Like, oh no, the United States government is going to bully John Smith. Well, no, it was that the United States government was going to tell, fucking Massachusetts to go suck its dick in front of fucking New Jersey. I don't know, whatever the fuck.